My husband sold my luxury cabin for $60,000. Then the FBI arrived at dinner. My husband announced, "I sold your little cabin for $60,000. His family clapped and said it was smart thinking. He stared at me and added, "This fancy dinner we're eating. I paid for it with the cabin money." Finally, something useful came from it. I sat there without saying anything. Then my phone rang. It was the buyer's lawyer yelling, "Why are police coming to our building?" I knew something bad was happening. The Thompson family sat around the big dinner table when my husband Greg stood up. He tapped his spoon on his mom Patricia's fancy glass cup. "Everyone listen up. I have big news to share," he said, sounding proud and important. "You all remember Natalie's silly cabin, the one she bought 4 years ago without asking me." My body got tense when he said silly cabin like it was a toy instead of something real. Well, I fixed that problem. I sold it last month for $60,000 while she was away working. He pointed at all the expensive food covering the table. "This whole dinner tonight. I bought it with that cabin money. At least now the cabin did something good for once." His family laughed and clapped their hands. But I didn't move or speak. My phone started buzzing in my pocket with a call that would change everything. "Why are government people at our office?" The buyer's lawyer would scream soon after. His scared voice told me what I already guessed was true. Before I keep going, I want to say thank you for watching. If you think every woman's hard work should be respected and not ignored, please think about subscribing. Costs nothing and helps these important stories reach more people. Now let's find out what happened next. But first, let me tell you how I ended up sitting at this table with people who had been treating me like I didn't matter for a very long time. 7 years married to Greg Thompson taught me exactly how invisible I was to his family. That morning, like every morning, I woke up early to make his coffee. He liked it with 3 spoons of sugar and milk. While he looked at his phone at our kitchen table, he didn't even say good morning back to me. The breakfast I cooked disappeared into his mouth while he stayed quiet. The only sounds were him chewing and his phone beeping with messages from his golf friends. Patricia called while I cleaned the dishes. She only talked to Greg about what food to cook for Sunday dinner, even though she knew I would spend 8 hours in the kitchen making everything she wanted. "Tell Natalie about the chicken," she said, like I was someone they hired to cook instead of family. "And tell her not to burn the vegetables like she did before." The vegetables weren't burned at all, but in the Thompson family, nothing I did was ever good enough. This pattern started right when we got married. When my boss gave me a big promotion at work, with more money and a nicer office that I earned by working really hard for 2 years, Greg barely looked up from his computer. He just mumbled something about how it was about time I helped pay for things. The next night, his brother Dylan won $20 on a scratch ticket at that same dinner table, and the whole family acted like he won $1 million. Patricia took pictures while Richard raised his glass to celebrate Dylan's smart money skills. The Thompson family showed who they really were through 1,000 tiny mean things that piled up over the years. Patricia always forgot to put a plate out for me at holiday dinners until Greg noticed and said something. Richard talked about money with Greg while I sat right there like I was invisible, even though I made more money than Greg for the past 3 years. Dylan borrowed money and never paid it back. He always joked that I probably wrote down every penny he owed me, which I did, but not because I was mean about it. During their weekly family dinners, my big wins at work got mentioned for 2 seconds while Greg's okay sales numbers got talked about like he was the smartest businessman in the world. The month I signed a huge deal at my company worth $2 million, dinner conversation was all about Greg closing a deal worth less than what I made in 1 month. When I tried to share my news, Patricia said, "That's nice, sweetheart," and then immediately asked Greg about his next sales project. These patterns made me decide to do something just for myself. 4 years ago, I opened a secret bank account that Greg didn't know about. Every extra project I did for money, every lunch I skipped to save money, every coffee I didn't buy went into that account. I watched the number get bigger slowly. Each time I added money felt like I was fighting back against them, thinking everything I earned belonged to Greg automatically. The cabin was my first big purchase from that secret account. 3 acres of beautiful pine trees 50 miles from our regular life, with an old porch looking out at a quiet lake. When Greg found out about it through some bank papers he looked at when trying to buy a new truck, he got so angry. He yelled at me for weeks. Patricia and Richard came to our house within 2 hours of his phone call, ready to tell me I was wrong. What kind of wife hides things? Patricia demanded, while Richard said I must be crazy to do something like this. But the cabin became my safe place. Every Friday afternoon, I drove away with my coffee and my notebooks, spending weekends in peaceful quiet. Greg refused to ever visit. He called it my stupid shack in the woods. His family made up stories where my cabin showed everything wrong with me. They said I was selfish, not practical, and a bad wife. 5 months ago, my company won a really important contract with a big government company. The job needed someone with special permission to work in offices across different countries in Asia. The decision makers picked me over 15 other people because I was really good at understanding complicated rules for different countries. Greg's first words weren't congratulations. He was suspicious instead. Why would they send a woman alone to other countries? He asked. Patricia suggested I was leaving behind my job as a wife. Before I left, I set everything up perfectly. The cabin's paperwork got registered with government systems because of my special work permission. This detail changed my simple cabin into something protected by the government. I left Greg clear instructions that said only for emergencies. I set up automatic payments for all the bills and hired a company to check on the property. His mean laugh when I explained all this still played in my head. Now sitting at this dinner table, watching Greg feel so proud about selling my cabin, my safe place, my achievement, my freedom, I felt my phone buzzing again in my pocket. Thomas Crawford, attorney at law, the screen said. I never heard this name before, but somehow I knew this call would show why Greg's proud announcement was about to become the biggest mistake he ever made. I said excuse me and left the table, walking onto the Thompsons' back deck with my phone against my ear. Thomas Crawford's shaky voice came through the phone, talking about government agents looking at papers, asking questions about property sales that needed special permissions. Behind me, through the glass doors, Greg pulled out papers from a fancy leather folder, showing his family all the details of his smart deal while Patricia poured more wine for everyone. 4 years earlier, the path to that cabin started with a different phone call. Elizabeth Harper, the old lady who owned it, had a kind voice when she first told me about the property. It's not perfect, she warned me. My husband built most of it himself after he stopped working on the trains. But there's something magic about those trees. They're good at keeping secrets safe. I drove there on a Wednesday morning when Greg thought I was at the dentist. The bumpy dirt road curved through tall pine trees that made the sunshine look golden. When the trees opened up to show the cabin, something tight in my chest relaxed for the first time in years. 2 floors of old brown wood, a metal roof turning green with time, and that deck tilted a little but still strong, looking out at a lake so calm it looked like a mirror. Elizabeth waited on the front steps, her white hair pulled back, wearing a big shirt that probably belonged to her husband who died. She walked me through each room, touching door frames and windows like she was saying goodbye to old friends. In the biggest bedroom, she stopped at a window facing where the sun comes up. My husband used to say watching sunrise through these trees was better than anything, she said quietly. Think he was right. When she told me the price, it was much less than it should be, probably $20,000 less. I don't need money, she explained, looking at my face like she could see everything inside. I need to know someone who really needs this place will live here. Someone who understands that sometimes 4 walls and silence are the only medicine that helps. The first payment I made was money I saved for 4 years by skipping lunches, saying no to dinners with friends, and wearing old clothes. Every dollar saved was a small way of fighting back against the Thompson family thinking I only existed to help Greg. My hands shook when I signed the papers in Elizabeth's kitchen, using my old last name, Natalie Chen, on every line. When she gave me the keys, they felt heavier than metal should, full of possibility and hope. For 3 weeks I kept my secret, driving there alone to walk through my rooms, sit on my deck, breathe air that belonged to me. I fixed small broken things. A cabinet door that stuck, a faucet that dripped water, I learned from people at the hardware store and videos online. Each thing I fixed felt like getting back a piece of myself that the Thompsons tried to erase. Greg found out by accident. He decided to change his car loan and needed my signature on papers. The loan lady's computer screen faced me when she looked up our credit information. And there it was in black letters. Recent search, Mountain View Mortgage Company. Greg's face went from confused to understanding to really angry in 3 seconds. The drive home was quiet, but once we got inside our house, the explosion came. You bought property without telling me. Where did you get money? His voice got louder with each question. Within 1 hour, Patricia's fancy car pulled into our driveway fast, followed by Richard's expensive car. Greg called his parents like calling soldiers to help him in a war. They sat in our living room like judges in a court. Patricia sat perfectly straight on our couch, her pearl necklace shining as she leaned toward me. "Natalie, sweetie," she started in that voice that made nice words sound like threats. "Help us understand what kind of wife makes big money choices without talking to her husband first." Richard stood by the fireplace with his hands behind his back like he was giving a speech at work. "This makes us worried about your thinking, Natalie. Hidden money, secret buying. These are not things a normal person does." I sat in the chair they positioned to face all 3 of them with my hands folded in my lap. "The cabin cost $50,000, I said calmly. "I paid for it completely with my own money from extra work. It didn't touch our shared money at all. That's not the point." Greg's fist hit the coffee table, making Patricia's teacup shake. "We're supposed to be partners. Partners don't hide things." The irony of Greg talking about being partners when he didn't notice I was gone for dozens of Saturdays, didn't ask about my extra work projects, didn't even remember our last 4 anniversaries, was so obvious I could almost taste it. But I stayed quiet, having learned long ago that defending myself only gave them more reasons to attack. The next few months became a battle. Greg refused to visit the cabin, calling it my crazy lady shack to everyone who would listen. His family created a story where my cabin showed everything wrong with our marriage. My selfishness, my lies, my failure to be a good wife. They told this story at every family party to every friend we knew until everyone believed that poor Greg was married to an unstable woman who hid money and bought property behind his back. But every Friday afternoon, I packed a small bag and drove away. Those weekends saved me. I learned to fix broken wood boards, to know different bird sounds, to grow tomatoes in pots on the deck. I wrote in notebooks, filling pages with thoughts I couldn't say out loud. The cabin learned my secrets. How I hated Sunday dinners. How I sometimes sat in my car in the driveway for 15 minutes getting brave enough to go inside my own house. How I started marking days on a private calendar, not counting toward something good, but to prove I was surviving. Patricia made things worse with what she called a family meeting, but was really everyone ganging up on me. She made a whole presentation on the computer with slides showing the cabin's supposed costs, dangers, and drain on our money. She researched broken pipes, roof problems, and tax increases, showing each one as a disaster waiting to happen. Dylan made jokes about me becoming a crazy forest woman, asking if I was growing illegal plants in the woods. Richard questioned whether I was meeting another man there. His meaning very clear. Greg sat quiet through it all, letting them speak for him like he always did. His silence hurt more than their words. When they finally stopped talking, I pulled out my phone and showed them photos. The garden I planted with herbs and vegetables growing. The desk I put by the window where morning light came in. The bookshelves I built myself, a little crooked but working fine. Their faces didn't change, only seeing proof of time spent away from them, energy used for something they couldn't control. They looked at my photos for exactly 4 seconds before Patricia closed my phone and handed it back to me with the same look she had when returning bad food at a restaurant. "Well," she said, fixing her pearl necklace, "I suppose everyone needs their little hobbies." The word hobbies came out with enough meanness to fill the lake behind my cabin. 3 months after that terrible meeting, everything changed. My boss, Mr. James Park, called me into his office on a Monday morning in March. The view from the 30th floor showed the city covered in spring rain. Mr. Park stood against it like a general planning a mission. We won the Chen Industries contract, he said right away. 5 months managing their offices across Asia. It's worth $15 million to our company and I need someone with your exact skills. The project needed special government permission because Chen Industries worked with the military. 16 people were considered for the job. My name sat at the top of the list, circled 3 times in Mr. Park's red pen. Your background check came back perfect, he said, sliding the folder across his desk. Your experience with international rules is the best in this office. The client asked for you specifically. I said yes immediately, the word escaping before I could think twice. 5 months away from the Thompsons felt like being offered air after years of drowning. Mr. Park smiled in a way that suggested he knew more about my home life than I ever told him. You leave in 4 weeks. The extra pay is really good. Danger pay plus overseas adjustment. We're talking about tripling your normal income each month. That night I told Greg over dinner, watching his fork stop halfway to his mouth. 5 months, his voice showed not worry but thinking. Why would they send you? Why not Harrison or Kumar? They've worked there longer. Because I have the special permission and the skills, I answered, keeping my voice calm even though his doubt hurt like always. A woman alone in Asia for 5 months, he muttered, going back to his plate. Seems weird. Can't you do it from here? Within 1 hour, Patricia called, having gotten Greg's worried call. Natalie, dear, her voice came through the speaker. I just heard about this overseas job. Don't you think it's rather selfish? Leaving your husband for months. Marriage needs giving up things, and it seems you only care about your job. The safety meeting 4 days later showed problems I didn't expect. Officer Maria Santos from the Government Security Office explained that all personal property had to be written down in government records. Your cabin in Pine Grove, she said, reading from her tablet, will be marked as belonging to a worker with special clearance working on sensitive projects. This gives extra protection against foreign problems or suspicious activity. My simple cabin had just become government property they watched over. The irony wasn't lost on me. The property Greg and his family said was worthless was now under government protection. I spent the next 4 days setting up careful coverage for my time away. The property company I hired came with great reviews, usually helping military families. Every bill payment was set up automatically, with backup systems. I put in security cameras that sent videos straight to cloud storage I could see from anywhere in the world. The emergency folder I made for Greg had 18 pages of detailed instructions. Emergency phone numbers, utility companies, repair schedules, and clear warnings about the cabin's government status. I highlighted emergency access only in yellow marker, underlining it 4 times. Greg looked through it with barely hidden amusement. It's just a shack in the woods, Natalie, not a military base, he laughed, throwing the folder onto the kitchen counter where it would stay untouched for the next 5 months. Tokyo's busy energy hit me when I stepped off the plane, but the feeling of freedom was stronger than any physical tiredness. My hotel room looked out at Tokyo Tower, the city's lights shining like stars. That first night, I stood on the balcony and felt my shoulders relax from their normal tight position near my ears. 5 months of not being dismissed, ignored, or insulted stretched ahead like a promise. The work was hard but exciting. I found problems with rules that had cost Chen Industries millions in possible fines. My daily reports to Mr. Park got praise that felt strange after years of Greg not caring. The client was impressed enough to ask me to stay longer, which I nicely said no to. 5 months was my limit. My weekly video calls with Greg became less and less interesting to him. At first, he managed 12 minutes of talking, asking basic questions about my work while his attention went to whatever was on his computer screen. By week 4, he was at Patricia's dinners during our scheduled calls, the family noise drowning out any chance of real conversation. Your being gone is barely noticed, Patricia said once, loud enough to be heard through Greg's phone, followed by laughter I knew was Dylan's. Patricia's emails came like clockwork every Sunday night. She sent articles about career women who lost their families or old stories of wives who left their duties for personal goals. Each message ended with "Worried about your marriage, Patricia," as if her worry had ever been about anything except control. The family group chat, which I'd been part of for 7 years, suddenly showed an error message one morning. You are no longer in this conversation. No reason given, no warning. Greg said it was a technical problem when I asked, but his social media told a different story. Photos from family dinners showed him centered between Patricia and Richard. Dylan's girlfriend Amanda sitting in what had been my seat. The captions read like announcements of my death. Great evening with the whole family and finally complete. My cabin security cameras became my connection to something real. Every morning I checked the videos while drinking coffee, watching deer walk through the yard or rain falling on the lake's surface. The weekly reports from the property company were short. Everything normal, no problems to report, but they gave more comfort than Greg's increasingly rare messages. By month 4, Greg stopped answering my calls completely. Text messages got one-word answers hours later. Busy, fine, later. His social media, however, showed he was very available for dinner with coworkers, drinks with Dylan, concerts with people I didn't know. Amanda, Dylan's girlfriend, showed up in more photos, always laughing at something Greg said. Her hand sometimes on his shoulder in that casual way that wasn't casual at all. Amanda's perfectly painted fingernails rested on Greg's shoulder in the last photo he posted. Her smile too big, her closeness too familiar. The timestamp showed last Thursday when he said he was working late on reports. I closed the laptop and stared at the Tokyo skyline, the city's pulse vibrating through my hotel window as I understood what those pictures meant. Not just not caring anymore, something else completely. The flight home stretched across 18 hours and 4 time zones. Plenty of time to prepare myself for whatever waited in Seattle. I texted Greg my arrival time 3 times, got nothing back. When the plane touched down on Friday afternoon, the November air was cold and sharp. I waited 50 minutes at baggage claim, watching families meet up, couples hug, drivers holding signs for strangers. No Greg. Finally, a text appeared. At Mom's making special dinner for your return. Come straight here. The taxi driver helped put my bags in the trunk while I stared at those words. Special dinner at Patricia's. After 5 months away, my husband couldn't be bothered to meet me at the airport. But the Thompsons were setting up something that needed preparation. The drive home took us past our neighborhood, and I asked the driver to slow down when we passed our house. Through the living room window, I saw furniture I didn't recognize. A brown leather couch where our blue sofa should be. Paintings on walls that had been empty when I left. The driveway had 3 cars I'd never seen before. A BMW newer than Greg's and something fancy in silver. Our garden, which I carefully took care of for 4 years, had been replaced with boring landscaping. This your house? The driver asked, noticing my stare. I'm not sure anymore, I answered honestly. I had him drop me at the corner, pulling my suitcase to our front door like a stranger coming to an unfamiliar home. My key still worked, but the house inside wasn't mine. The leather furniture was real, expensive. The art was those abstract pieces that Patricia would like. Safe, boring, costly. The kitchen had been completely reorganized. My carefully arranged spice rack was gone, replaced by decorative containers that probably held nothing. In our bedroom, was it still ours? The sheets were different. Fancy cotton still in their packaging folds. The closet showed Greg's clothes taking over my section. My remaining things pushed into a corner like they didn't matter. On the dresser sat a bottle of perfume I didn't recognize. Definitely not mine. I left my suitcase closed and drove to the Thompson house. My hands steady on the wheel despite the exhaustion pulling at my body. Their driveway looked like a fancy car show. Patricia's Lexus, Richard's Mercedes, Dylan's Range Rover, Greg's BMW, and 3 others I didn't recognize. The house glowed with warm light, shadows moving behind curtains like a play on a stage. The front door was unlocked. I could hear voices from the dining room, laughter that sounded like celebration. Patricia's voice rose above the others. He handled it perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. I stood in the hallway listening to my absence being celebrated before stepping into view. The scene looked like a magazine photo. Patricia's special crystal, The set she only used for Christmas and big announcements sparkled under the fancy light. Bottles of wine that cost more than my weekly food budget stood open on the table. Everyone dressed for a party. Patricia in pearls and silk, Richard in his golf club jacket, Dylan in what looked like a new suit. Greg stood at the head of the table, in the seat I usually sat in when we hosted, wearing the look of a man who just won everything. Natalie. Patricia's voice carried fake warmth. Perfect timing. We were just about to celebrate. They arranged themselves around the table like an audience at a theater, each face showing that look of barely held excitement that came before big news. Amanda was there too, sitting next to Dylan, but angled toward Greg, her hand resting near his wine glass. "Welcome home," Greg said, not moving from his powerful position at the table's head. "How was the flight?" Before I could answer, he raised his glass, demanding attention with authority I'd never seen him show. "Actually, before we eat, I have something important to share." He paused, enjoying the moment. "You all know about Natalie's little cabin. Her impractical purchase 4 years ago." My shoulders tensed at his tone, the dismissive way he said little cabin like it was a toy. "Well, I finally did something about it. I sold it for $60,000 2 months ago while she was overseas." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. The room burst into applause. Richard's golf clap. Patricia's delighted gasp. Dylan's whistle of appreciation. Amanda clapped too, her eyes never leaving Greg's face. Greg pointed to the fancy food on the table, dishes I recognized as catered from the expensive Italian restaurant downtown. "The money for this dinner. It's from the cabin sale. At least one meal is covered." His family laughed at this joke, this casual announcement that he stole my safe place and used the money for their entertainment. I stayed perfectly still, my silence complete, while my phone started buzzing in my pocket. Greg pulled out a leather folder, the kind expensive lawyers use, spreading documents across Patricia's perfect tablecloth. "The best part is how I handled everything myself," he bragged, running his finger along the pages. "Researched prices, managed 4 competing offers, saved thousands in agent fees." "Brilliant," Richard murmured, leaning forward to look at the papers. "Absolutely brilliant business thinking. How did you handle the signature problem?" Dylan asked, his question showing real curiosity rather than worry. Greg's smile got bigger. "Spent 4 days practicing. Got it perfect. See." He pointed to different signature lines, each showing my name in handwriting that was close to mine, but not quite right. The N in Natalie tilted wrong. The final N too round. Patricia looked at the documents with approval. "Smart thinking," she declared. "That's what I call smart thinking." My phone buzzed again. Thomas Crawford, attorney at law. I didn't recognize the name, but something in my stomach told me this call would change everything happening in this room. I stepped away from the table, pressing the phone to my ear as I moved toward the glass doors that led to Patricia's perfect back porch. The caller ID showed Thomas Crawford, attorney at law, a name that meant nothing to me, but somehow felt important in this moment. "Mrs. Thompson." The man's voice cracked with panic. "This is Thomas Crawford. I helped the buyers in your cabin purchase. I mean the sale your husband arranged." Through the glass doors, I watched Greg refill wine glasses, his mouth moving as he continued his show for his interested audience. Patricia touched his arm lovingly, the proud mother admiring her clever son. Amanda laughed at something Dylan said, but her eyes followed Greg's movements with interest that went beyond casual friendship. "What can I help you with, Mr. Crawford?" I kept my voice steady, professional, though my heart had started beating fast. "Why are government authorities at our office?" The words rushed out, his calm completely gone. "They're looking at documents, asking about restricted property sales, talking about fake transfers. They've taken our files." "What kind of property did your husband sell us?" "Government authorities." The words landed with the weight of victory I hadn't expected. I moved further onto the porch, the November evening air sharp against my travel-tired skin. "Mr. Crawford, I've been overseas for 5 months. This is the first I'm hearing about any sale." Perhaps you should explain exactly what deal you're talking about. The Pine Grove cabin. His breathing was loud through the phone. Your husband gave us all the papers. Handled everything himself. We finished the deal 8 weeks ago. $60,000 transferred to your shared account. But now there are agents here talking about federal property records and security clearances. They're using words like fraud and forgery. 8 weeks ago, while I was in Tokyo carefully documenting rule violations that would save Chen Industries millions, Greg had been faking my signature on government documents. The irony was almost beautiful in its perfection. Mr. Crawford, I said carefully, I need to look at some documents and make some calls. I'll contact you within the hour. I ended the call and stood in Patricia's carefully kept garden, surrounded by roses she paid someone else to take care of, understanding what I just learned. My phone showed 4 missed calls from a blocked number while I'd been talking to Crawford. As I looked through them, a text appeared from a number I knew immediately. Special Agent Lisa Martinez. We met during my security clearance renewal 7 months ago. A careful woman with sharp eyes who asked deep questions about every part of my life. Her message was short. Mrs. Thompson, aware of situation regarding your Pine Grove property. Normal. Attend family dinner as planned. Keep subjects unaware. Team coming. The text had arrived 3 hours ago while my plane was landing in Seattle. Agent Martinez knew about the fake sale before I even got home. The government systems that tracked my cabin as a protected asset had marked the unauthorized transfer, starting an investigation that was now coming to this dinner party where Greg celebrated his criminal genius. I thought about the safety meeting I attended before leaving for Tokyo. Officer Santos's careful explanation of how property owned by workers with clearances became part of a bigger protective system. The cabin wasn't just mine. It was tagged in government systems as an asset that couldn't be transferred without lots of authorizations. Greg's forgery didn't just steal my property. He set off alarms in systems he didn't know existed. Through the window, I watched him stand again, leading the conversation at the head of the table. His hands moved expressively as he appeared to be explaining something, probably the detailed story of how he was so clever, so smart. Patricia's face glowed with motherly pride. Richard nodded approvingly at whatever business wisdom his son was sharing. They looked like a painting of family happiness, completely unaware that their golden boy had just confessed to federal crimes. I went back to the dining room, sliding my phone into my pocket where it buzzed with another message I didn't check. Greg paused mid-sentence as I entered, his eyebrows raising slightly. Important call. He asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really care about the answer. Just work, following up on some paperwork, I replied, taking my seat at the far end of the table, the place they assigned me like an afterthought. Greg laughed, the sound carrying an edge of looking down on me that I knew too well. Always working, even fresh off the plane. You should learn to relax, Natalie. He turned back to his audience, eager to continue his story. The best part was getting all the necessary documents. While Natalie was traveling across Asia, I took charge to organize our money papers. Found everything in her home office. Deed, title, insurance documents, all sitting there in her little safe. The combination she never bothered to change from our wedding date. Smart thinking, Richard murmured, taking control of wasteful property. That's what a real businessman does. Patricia nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Why let money sit doing nothing in some cabin when it could be invested properly? Greg's been looking at some excellent opportunities in Dylan's new business. Dylan leaned forward, suddenly interested. We could definitely use the money. My partner thinks we could triple the investment within 20 months. They were already spending my money, dividing up the money from Greg's theft like pirates sharing treasure. Not one person at this table asked why I wasn't asked about selling my own property. The assumption of Greg's power was so complete, so unquestioned that they couldn't imagine his actions as criminal. Your signature work was impressive, Dylan said to Greg, grinning widely. Honestly, couldn't tell the difference from the real thing. 4 days of practice, Greg replied proudly. I used her old notebooks to study her handwriting. The trick is getting the pressure right, the way she curves certain letters. Amanda finally spoke, her voice carrying a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. You must be so proud, Natalie. Greg really took charge while you were gone. I met her gaze steadily, noticing how her hand had moved to rest near Greg's on the table, their fingers almost touching. Oh yes, I replied. He certainly took charge of something that wasn't his to take. The words hung in the air for a moment before Greg laughed them off. Everything in a marriage is ours, honey. That's what partnership means. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Agent Martinez. 18 minutes. I watched the second hand on Patricia's grandfather clock sweep past the 12. 17 minutes since Agent Martinez's last text. Greg had moved on to describing his future investment plans for the $60,000. His voice carrying the confidence of a man who believed he got away with everything. Patricia was serving her homemade chocolate cake, the dessert she saved for special victories, when the first black vehicle pulled quietly into the driveway. The headlights swept across the dining room windows like searchlights, followed immediately by 3 more vehicles positioning themselves with military precision. Through the thin curtains, I could see the government plates, the kind that made neighbors look through blinds and wonder what kind of trouble arrived on their street. 7 figures came out of the vehicles, moving with the coordinated skill of people who had done this many times before. I stood up from the table, my movement so sudden that Amanda's wine glass wobbled. I'll get the door, I said, though no one had knocked yet. Greg barely looked at me, too interested in explaining to Richard how he planned to use the cabin money for a bigger real estate business. I reached the front door just as Agent Lisa Martinez raised her hand to knock. She stood with 6 other agents beside her, all wearing the kind of dark suits that screamed government authority. Her eyes met mine with professional recognition. She remembered me from the security clearance interview, remembered the woman who sat across from her for 4 hours answering questions about every part of her life. Mrs. Thompson, she said quietly. Are all the subjects here? They're in the dining room, I confirmed, stepping aside to let them enter. All of them. They're having dessert. The agents moved through Patricia's hallway with practiced precision, their footsteps deliberate on her polished hardwood floors. Each footfall sounded like a countdown, marking the seconds until Greg's world fell apart. Agent Martinez led the way, her hand resting casually near her badge, ready to show credentials that would turn celebration into disaster. The dining room fell silent as 7 government agents filed in, spreading out to block all exits with movements so smooth they seemed planned. Greg's fork hung suspended halfway to his mouth, chocolate cake sliding off onto Patricia's special tablecloth. Richard's face lost color so quickly I thought he might pass out. Dylan pressed back in his chair as if he could disappear into the wallpaper, while Amanda's eyes darted between the agents and the door, calculating distances she'd never be able to cross. Greg Thompson, Agent Martinez announced, her voice carrying the weight of government authority that made everything else in the room seem suddenly unimportant. She held up her badge, the gold shield catching the light from Patricia's fancy light. You're under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit interstate commerce violations. The words landed like physical hits. Greg's wine glass slipped from his hand, breaking on the floor in a shower of crystal and red wine that spread across Patricia's expensive rug like blood. This is crazy. He jumped to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. It was just a property deal, a simple real estate transaction. Agent Martinez moved toward him with unhurried confidence. Selling government-registered property using forged documents isn't a simple transaction, Mr. Thompson. It's a federal crime. The handcuffs appeared in her hands with practiced ease, the metal clicking around Greg's wrists with a finality that made Patricia scream. There's been a mistake. Patricia's voice cracked, her hands flying to her pearls as if they could protect her from this reality. This is a misunderstanding. Greg was just being smart. We need to call our lawyer. Richard stood up, trying to summon the authority he had in boardrooms, but his voice shook as he spoke. You can't just come into our home and... Sir, please sit down, one of the other agents said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Richard sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 74 years. The agents began their careful recording of the scene. One took pictures of the forged documents still spread across the table, Greg's confession turned into evidence. Another captured images of the champagne bottles, the fancy dinner spread, the celebration that had been funded with stolen money. A third agent collected the family's phones, ignoring Amanda's protests about privacy and Dylan's claims that he wasn't involved. Greg turned to me, his face cycling through emotions, confusion, anger, desperation, before settling on something that looked like betrayal. "Natalie, tell them this is a misunderstanding. You're my wife. Explain that I had every right to sell that property. Tell them." I met his gaze with the same steady silence I had perfected over 7 years of being dismissed, ignored, and insulted. The silence that had once been my prison now became my power. I said nothing, letting my lack of words speak everything about years of pain that led to this moment. "Wives can't testify against husbands," he said desperately, grasping for legal ideas he didn't understand. "You can't do this to me. I was helping our money situation. I was being smart." Agent Martinez paused in her process of securing Greg's hands behind his back. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, spouses can absolutely testify in federal cases involving crimes against each other. But more importantly, we don't need your wife's testimony. The evidence you provided tonight, your detailed confession to your family, the forged documents you displayed, the fraudulent sale of government-registered property, that's more than enough." She looked at me then, her expression professionally neutral, but with something in her eyes that might have been understanding. "Mrs. Thompson, we'll need you to come to the federal building tomorrow to provide a statement. Our financial crimes unit has found additional problems that go beyond the cabin sale." Patricia's gasp was loud. "Additional problems." Agent Martinez turned her attention to Greg's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson Sr., you'll both need to come in for questioning as well. Your names appear on several suspicious transfers connected to this case." She paused, letting the meaning sink in. "It seems the cabin sale was just the beginning. Our money experts have found evidence of systematic theft from joint accounts, hidden investments, and what appears to be a pattern of financial fraud going back several years. The family that had spent 7 years celebrating Greg's every tiny success while dismissing everything I accomplished now sat frozen, watching their golden child being led away in handcuffs. Their kingdom of judgment and casual cruelty was crumbling in real time, brought down by Greg's own arrogance and their enthusiastic participation in celebrating his crimes. Dylan stood frozen against the dining room wall, his face pale as one of the agents began reading him his rights as a material witness. Amanda had collapsed into a chair, makeup streaming down her cheeks as she repeatedly insisted she barely knew any of them, despite the photos on Greg's phone showing her at family gatherings for the past 9 months. Patricia clutched at the agent nearest to her, begging to go with Greg, while Richard sat with his head in his hands, mumbling something about calling their lawyer, who ironically had been suspended 3 years prior for his own financial crimes. The next morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost unreal. I sat in my kitchen now, not ours, drinking coffee from the mug I bought myself in Tokyo, watching the sunrise paint the walls gold. My phone had been vibrating constantly since midnight with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, journalists who somehow got my contact information, and Patricia's repeated attempts to reach me despite being explicitly told not to contact me by government agents. The first consequence came within 56 hours. Summit Title Services, the company that processed Greg's fraudulent sale, found government investigators at their door Tuesday morning. By afternoon, their license had been suspended pending investigation. The owner, Bradley Morrison, gave a panicked interview to local news, claiming they followed standard procedures. But the forged documents Greg provided were so obviously fraudulent that their failure to verify authorization was gross negligence. Morrison's 32-year career in real estate ended in a single morning, his reputation destroyed by Greg's transaction. For real estate agents who advised Greg on pricing and strategy faced their own consequences. Jennifer Patterson, who provided comparable sales data, lost her license when investigators discovered she never verified Greg's ownership of the property. Robert Klein, who connected Greg with potential buyers, was found to have ignored multiple warning signs in the documentation. Sandra Marsh, who celebrated the sale on her professional social media, claiming credit for helping another successful transaction, watched her 23-year career disappear when screenshots of her posts became evidence of professional negligence. Patricia's Facebook posts became particularly damaging. Her proud declaration that my brilliant son just made the deal of the year, accompanied by photos of the celebration dinner, had been shared 19 times before the arrests. Neighbors who always found the Thompsons annoying gleefully provided screenshots to investigators. Her post from 4 weeks earlier, so proud of Greg taking charge while his wife travels across Asia, became evidence of planning ahead of time. The country club ladies she bragged to about Greg's business skills now crossed the street to avoid her. Thomas Crawford's law firm collapsed spectacularly. The buyers, an innocent couple named David and Jennifer Martinez who thought they were purchasing a weekend retreat, sued everyone involved. Their lawsuit named Crawford's firm, the title company, all 4 real estate agents, Greg, and even attempted to include me before their attorney realized I was the victim. Crawford's partners voted him out within a week. His name removed from the building's sign before the paint was dry on the government papers. 7 months of investigation revealed the scope of Greg's lies went far beyond the cabin. Government money experts discovered he'd been taking money from our joint accounts for years, funding failed investments and unauthorized loans to his family. Every transaction told a story of entitlement and theft. The $25,000 to Dylan for his revolutionary online business that never sold a single item. The $18,000 to Richard for golf club memberships and gambling debts he hid from Patricia. The steady stream of smaller amounts, $600 here, $1,000 there, that funded Greg's lunches with Amanda, their weekend trips I never knew about, gifts for a relationship that had apparently been developing while I worked overseas. Judge Patricia Thornton presided over Greg's sentencing with the weariness of someone who'd seen too many entitled men believe the rules didn't apply to them. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle had the kind of impressive building design created to remind defendants of the government's power. Greg sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit properly. 7 months in government detention had taken away his casual arrogance along with 18 pounds. Your Honor, Greg began his statement, his voice lacking the confidence that once commanded boardrooms and family dinners. I meant no harm. I was simply trying to use underutilized assets better. In marriage, property is shared. I believed I had every right to make financial decisions for our family's benefit. Judge Thornton removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly before responding. Mr. Thompson, you've just confessed to planning ahead and systematic planning. You didn't make a financial decision. You committed wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Your detailed explanation of researching prices, practicing signatures, and avoiding legal fees doesn't make your crime smaller. Confirms it. The sentence came down like a hammer. 5 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release, plus $320,000 in repayment. The man who committed federal crimes to avoid $1,200 in legal fees now owed more than he'd earn in a decade. The courtroom erupted in whispers as the number sank in. Greg's attorney, a public defender since no private lawyer would take his case, slumped in his chair. Patricia and Richard faced their own legal consequences. The investigation revealed they received over $65,000 in stolen funds over the years. Money they spent on cruise vacations and country club fees while knowing their son's income couldn't support such generosity. They stood before a different judge 3 weeks later, their attorney arguing they were merely naive parents who trusted their son. The prosecutor's response was devastating. Email evidence showed they actively encouraged Greg to take control of family finances while I was overseas. Mason surprised everyone by cooperating immediately. Faced with potential conspiracy charges, he provided prosecutors with detailed testimony about family discussions regarding my cabin, Greg's planning sessions, and their parents' knowledge of the scheme. In exchange for probation and community service, he became the star witness against his own family. His testimony revealed years of casual discussions about my wasteful spending on the cabin, strategies to access my accounts, and Patricia's suggestion that Greg handle things while I was abroad. Mason's testimony concluded with him looking directly at his parents. His voice steady as he described years of financial manipulation he witnessed but never questioned until government agents showed him the evidence. They knew, he said simply. We all knew Natalie's money was being taken. We just called it family finances. The courtroom had gone silent at that admission, even the court reporter pausing before continuing her transcription. 4 weeks after the final sentencing, I returned to my cabin for the first time since Greg's arrest. The property management company had maintained it perfectly during the chaos, but now government repayment funds had transformed it into something beyond my original vision. The narrow dirt road had been properly smoothed and covered with gravel. New security cameras, discreet but thorough, monitored every approach. The front door had a new lock system that required both a key and a code, installed by the same company that secured government facilities. Inside, the transformation continued. The kitchen I planned to fix someday had been completely rebuilt. New appliances, granite countertops, cabinets that closed smoothly instead of requiring the specific angle I'd memorized. The windows throughout had been replaced with triple pane glass that turned the pine grove outside into a living painting, every needle sharp against the sky. The old deck had been reinforced and extended, now wrapping around 3 sides of the cabin with built-in benches that faced the lake. Agent Lisa Martinez arrived on a Wednesday morning, pulling up in her personal vehicle rather than the government car. She carried 3 cups of coffee from the shop in town, remembering my preference for oat milk without my having mentioned it. We sat on the new deck, the November air crisp but not cold, watching mist rise from the lake. The investigation has expanded, she said. Her professional tone softened by something that might have been respect. Your case broke open something bigger. Greg had been running similar schemes with 4 other families, targeting women whose assets he could access through his position at the bank. She explained how my cabin's government protection had been the alarm that exposed everything. Without that classification, Greg might have continued indefinitely, stealing from women who trusted their finances to institutions where he held influence. The FBI had recovered nearly $600,000 in stolen funds, though much had already been spent on the Thompson family's lifestyle. The divorce proceedings took place entirely through lawyers. Washington law showed no mercy to imprisoned spouses who committed financial crimes against their partners. The judge, an older woman named Carolyn Foster, reviewed the evidence with visible disgust. Mrs. Chen, she said, using my maiden name which I'd legally reclaimed, the court awards you all marital assets without exception. Everything came to me. The house in the suburbs with its expensive furniture I didn't want, the joint savings Greg hadn't managed to steal, the investment accounts he'd hidden poorly. Even Patricia's special crystal that she'd specifically written into her will for Greg. The crystal was particularly satisfying. 15 place settings of Waterford that had been in her family for generations, now sitting in boxes in my basement, waiting for donation to charity. Greg's letters began arriving 7 weeks into his sentence. The first was angry, accusing me of setting everything up, of knowing about the government protection and trapping him. The second came 6 weeks later, shifting to self-pity, complaining about his circumstances and the unfairness of his situation. By the third letter, hints of understanding crept in. Not remorse exactly, but recognition that his clever plan hadn't been clever at all. I found out about the government property rules. He wrote in what would be his final letter. They explained it during legal education class here. I should have asked questions. I should have asked you. He never apologized, never acknowledged the years of theft before the cabin, never mentioned the pain of being invisible in my own marriage. He simply stopped writing, perhaps finally understanding that his words, like his presence, were no longer welcome in my life. The local newspaper ran the story for weeks. Suburban scandal. Wife's cabin exposes years of financial fraud became the most read article in the paper's online history. Reporters called constantly, offering payment for exclusive interviews, promising to tell my side of the story. I declined them all. The government investigation's findings were public record, pages of documentation that spoke more powerfully than any interview could. The facts themselves were vindication enough. Greg in federal prison. His parents bankrupted by repayment payments, their reputation destroyed by their own greed. My neighbors' attitudes shifted completely. Where once they'd seen Greg's quiet wife who rarely spoke at block parties, they now saw someone who'd endured years of financial abuse while building her own success. Janet from next door brought casseroles during the divorce proceedings. Mike from across the street offered to maintain my lawn without payment. The invitations to coffee and book clubs multiplied, though I politely declined most, preferring the solitude I'd earned. The consulting work flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. My experience with international compliance combined with the public knowledge of my case made me highly sought after. Companies wanted someone who understood both technical complexities and the human element of financial crime. My rates tripled, then multiplied by 5. Working from the cabin's converted second bedroom, overlooking the lake through those crystal-clear windows, I earned more in 7 months than Greg had stolen in 7 years. Ruth Morrison, no, Elizabeth Harper, the elderly woman who sold me the cabin, sent a card on the anniversary of the sale. "I knew you needed this place," she wrote in careful handwriting. "My husband would be pleased to know it protected you when you needed it most." On the first anniversary of that dinner, that horrible wonderful dinner where Greg announced his crime to his celebrating family, I sat on my reinforced deck as the sun set through the pines. The wine wasn't special, just a bottle from the local grocery store, chosen because I liked the label. No one would judge this choice. No one would comment on its price or origin. The silence around me was complete, broken only by natural sounds: wind through pine needles, water touching the lake's edge, an owl calling from somewhere in the darkness. My phone sat silent on the table beside me, containing no contacts from that previous life. No Thompson family group chat, no passive-aggressive messages from Patricia, no dismissive texts from Greg. The absence of their voices revealed how much space they'd occupied, how their constant judgment had shaped my days. This story of government justice served cold had you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Natalie stayed silent at the dinner table while the FBI arrived, knowing exactly what was coming next. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe to Glow Girls Revenge and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the power.